Not a museum behind glass. Your sandals sink into sun-scorched dust as a brick mountain claws at the Mesopotamian sky. Heat wavers above baked clay. Cumin and cardamom drift from the market. A hammer rings somewhere in a forge, bright as a star. The ziggurat ahead rises tier on tier, a staircase for the gods, its mud brick skin sipping sunlight the way reeds sip the river. Priests pass with tablets clutched like beating hearts. Scribes murmur numbers of barley and dates. And under all of it, under trade and law and labor, something older hums. The engine of life the ancients believed they could tune with human hands. Here, sex is not a private whisper, but a cosmic instrument. In this land between the Tigris and Euphrates, the silt-rich bow of the world, people measure time by floods and harvests, by calving herds and swelling bellies. Every breath depends on fertility, and fertility depends on powers no farmer can command alone. So the city builds ladders to heaven and learns the courage of asking. It asks with offerings. It asks with songs. And, most audaciously, it asks with bodies. Because for them, creation is not an idea, but a rhythm of joining and separation. A pattern the gods imprinted on the world. A pattern humans can echo. At the summit of this belief stands a goddess who refuses to be familiar. Inanna to Sumer, Ishtar to Akkad and Babylon, she is honey and iron, a lover whose kiss can unmake a king, a warrior whose fury blooms like summer lightning. They do not soften her with pastoral gentleness. They crown her with contradictions. She is the force that opens the womb and the force that opens a soldier's ribs. She is a storm draped in silk, a standard planted in the mud. To worship her is to accept that life is not tidy, that the same hand that plants a seed may draw a sword. You do not tame a river by lecturing it. You bank it, channel it, bless it, fear it, so the city learns to live inside paradox. On one side, the clay tablet, lines incised with decisions that make a marketplace possible. Weights and measures, penalties and prices, the memorized backbone of order. On the other, the temple vow, rites that turn flesh into prayer. The modern mind strains to keep these worlds apart, law cold and rational, ritual warm and irrational. The Mesopotamian mind does not split so easily. In the same morning, a man can swear an oath over a contract and kneel in incense fog to beg a goddess for rain. The same priest who chants a liturgy may also audit a granary. The same city that drowns adulterers might sanctify a union between strangers beneath a divine name. The hinge is not hypocrisy. It is categorization. What happens under the gaze of the goddess is not the same kind of thing as what happens in a private bed. Different rooms, different rules. Listen to the street's grammar. Hoofbeats bargaining, a child reciting syllables, A-E-I-U, while tracing cuneiform wedges onto a practice tablet. A father haggles the price of an ox. A brewer ladles froth from a clay jar. A soldier burnishes a bronze shield the way a mother smooths a newborn's hair. You could live your whole life at ground level and think this is all there is. Goods and gossip, the satisfactions of bread and beer. But the ziggurat insists otherwise. Each tier is a sentence in the city's argument with the sky. Each stair is an answer to drought, plague, warfare, and the stubborn mystery of why seeds sprout in one field and rot in another. The height is itself a kind of prayer, a proof that humans will stack mud until it touches myth. At the base, a gateway breathes cool air. Inside, light dims to an amber dusk. Reed matting hushes footsteps. The scent shifts from sun-baked dust to cedar and resin. Somewhere water chuckles in a basin. This is not commerce. This is not household. This is precinct, the innermost engine room of the worldview. Here, offerings glow on altars, figs, dates, fine flour, lamb fat that sputters when it kisses the coals. Here a coin is not money. It is a syllable of a sentence addressed to a god. Here a kiss is not romance. It is choreography that mirrors the meeting of sky and earth each spring. The difference is not metaphoric. It is ontological. The act changes its species under the goddess's gaze. Pause on that threshold. Because the shock you feel, the tug of modern law and ethics, the instinct to sort, to condemn, to defend, is part of the story. Mesopotamia forces us to hold two truths at once, the necessity of order and the volatility of life. Without contracts, the city collapses into theft. Without ritual, the seasons collapse into terror. So they build both. They invent writing to count grain and to sing hymns. They codify penalties and also codify prayers. They police households with ferocity, and yet open a door, just one door, where the body becomes a civic instrument. It is an engineering solution to metaphysical risk, a sluice gate for desire, a corridor where chaos is led by the hand and taught to serve. Inanna Ishtar makes that corridor possible because she contains contradictions without apology. Her myths are crowded with lovers, mortal and divine, and with battles where she rips open mountains to release their waters. She descends to the underworld and returns. She grants kingship and withdraws it. She is both the tongue of the love song and the scream of the war cart. Think of her as the city's admission that the world is powered by energies too wild to domesticate, but too necessary to ignore. You cannot outlaw spring. You can only ritualize it, which is why, in this very precinct, you may witness what the city insists on naming holy, not because it is pure in the moralistic sense, but because it is potent. Potency is the measure that matters. Does the rite move the cosmic needle toward rain, toward milk in the ewes, toward healthy births? If yes, then the rite belongs here, under hymns and oil lamps. The stranger matters little. The coin matters much because it is not payment but transformation. It reframes the act as offering, shifts it out of the ledger of private pleasure and into the ledger of public survival. Outside, a scribe tilts his stylus and notes weather signs. A farmer squints at the river's shoulder, judging whether its muscle will rise. Inside, a priest recites names of the goddess that shiver like harp strings. Morning star, queen of battles, she who loves the song. Two systems breathe in synchrony, law steadying the day-to-day, ritual tuning the seasons. When they harmonize, the city hums. When they jar, panic ripples through alleys and courtyards. Because every life depends on alignment, of people with contracts, of contracts with kings, of kings with gods. All of this is prelude to a sound you cannot unhear once you know what it means. It is small, almost nothing. A bright ring on cloth, silver kissing linen. A coin, the city has a word for it. The precinct has another. In a stall outside, it buys onions. In here, it seals a vow. In a ledger, it is a unit. In a hymn, it is a syllable addressed to the sky. And to modern ears, this is where friction sharpens into spark. The moment when the same object belongs to two worlds, when the same body is read by two grammars. The ancients do not reconcile the difference. They operationalize it. That is their genius and their danger. If you came seeking a clean story, civilization marching away from superstition toward reason, you will not find it here. You will find a culture that mothered reason while refusing to orphan ritual, that invented jurisprudence while believing a goddess could tilt the rain. You will find tablets that threaten death for forbidden beds and poems that melt with chosen love. You will find healers who mix herbs and beer, and exorcists who knot cords against demons. You will find a city that, when pressed by drought or plague, doubles down on both ledgers. More law to prevent collapse, more right to invite mercy, so stand again in the heat, and then step once more into the cool. Feel how the world divides and recombines. Watch the brick mountain insist that humans can talk to heaven. Feel the market at your back, the altar before you, the throb of drums braided with the clack of styluses. This is not hypocrisy. It is architecture. The city is a machine built to host paradox. It turns desire into irrigation, fear into song, power into procedure, prayer into policy. And now the threshold grows narrow, the lanterns brighten, the voices soften to ritual pitch. Somewhere a priest inhales to speak the goddess's name. Somewhere a stranger fingers a coin and rehearses a sentence he has learned by heart. Somewhere a woman or a man waits in consecrated linen, eyes rimmed with kohl, hair heavy with perfume, heart beating with the gravity of a season. Civilization needs fences, not only walls of brick that keep wolves from lambs, but invisible lines that tell a city where its own soul ends and the desert begins. Mesopotamia drew those lines with a stylus's bite and a priest's breath, then stood watch like a night guard on a rooftop. Some borders were porous by design, temple thresholds where bodies became prayers, clinics where words became medicine. Others were granite hard. Cross them and the city answered with water, fire, exile. These weren't mere preferences. They were load-bearing rules in a world where a single crack could travel from a bed to a granary to a throne. Start with the line that made men most afraid, the role a body takes when desire becomes action. In a dominance culture, penetration is power. The active partner, even with another man, does not forfeit status. He advertises it. The receptive partner, if he is a free, equal male, signals a shift the system reads as a collapse of rank. The shame is not about love. It is about hierarchy leaking. Divination tablets whisper calamities for a man who lies with his equal as with a wife. His house thins, his name shrinks. The language is omen, not statute, but it maps real fear. If roles blur in bed, they might blur in court, at canal, in army line. The city's answer is stigma with teeth. It polices posture to keep ladders straight. Now step to the taboos with punishments like hammers. Bestiality isn't only revulsion. It is cosmological sabotage. The Shamat episode taught that sex civilizes by pulling a man out of animal life. To go the other way is to tear the seam stitched at the waterhole, to erase the very conversion that made cities possible. Punishments are severe. Death, ritual purges of soil and house, not because the act discusses private morality, but because it muddies the human-animal canal the whole ethos depends on. If Enkidu's awakening is a charter myth, bestiality is an anti-charter, an attempt to unwrite the charter with a single act. Incest is similar in structural danger. The household is the smallest city. It trains obedience, distributes labor, and roots property. Incest twists that circuit into a knot that overheats and burns. The law responds with ferocity calibrated to relationship. A son with his mother, fire. A man with his daughter, exile. The wilderness reclaiming him as a lesson. The penalties read like exorcisms: burn the pollution, expel the pollution. Behind the cruelty is arithmetic. Lineage must stay legible, or property dissolves into quarrels the courts cannot adjudicate without turning kin into enemies. The city would rather scorch a node than let the network collapse. Notice the silence about women with women. The code hardly speaks. That is not mercy. It is erasure. In a ledger where a woman's sexuality is defined by its impact on paternity, acts that do not threaten inheritance vanish into bureaucratic fog. Desire that neither transfers seed nor confuses a line registers as a non-event to the law's blunt instrument. The cost is invisibility. A whole country of feeling disappears from official speech. But absence in tablets does not mean absence in life. It means the city chose not to count a reality because counting it did not serve the ledgers it prioritized. Now look at the exceptions that prove the architecture. In Ishtar's precinct live the liminal clergy, terms shift across centuries. Asinu, Kurgaru, Gala, figures whose garments, voices, and roles bend the gender binary on purpose. Under the goddess's aegis, they officiate, mourn, sing, sometimes participate in rites that rehearse creation's androgyny. The city's genius is not tolerance in a modern key. It is compartmentalization with reverence. What destabilizes rank on the street becomes sacred in a chapel. The same gesture that would threaten hierarchies in the barracks becomes a hymn under a god statue. The precinct absorbs variance and converts it into fuel for myth. A pressure valve again, this time for gender along with sex. A skeptic will say, this is just control dressed as piety. Sometimes it is. But the design has a brutal coherence. The city cannot survive floods of ambiguity in every room at once, so it builds designated arenas where ambiguity is both allowed and meaningful. Household, crisp lines. Temple, curated blur. Court, ledgers. Clinic, prayers and poultices. Poetry, confession. Myth, danger domesticated into story. The machine runs because each room forbids what another room hosts. The city is not a thesis. It is choreography. What happens when choreography fails? The archive answers with ash and ink. Cases appear where a priest misuses an office, where a husband's violence shatters the very order he claims to defend, where a vow becomes a cage, where a jealous neighbor weaponizes suspicion and drags an innocent woman to the river's edge. Law can be a ritual too, and bad ritual kills. The tablets record fines, banishments, curses aimed at court officials who sold verdicts. Mesopotamia is not self-congratulating. It is self-correcting when it can be. The king rewrites a clause. A deity's cult reforms a rite. A city replaces a magistrate. But sometimes correction arrives as ruin. Walls crack. Fields salt. Families scatter. A border undone in secret becomes, in time, a border no army can hold. Return now to the epic's long arc and watch borders educate a king. Gilgamesh begins as a man who treats thresholds like suggestions. He ends counting bricks, honoring doors, reading the city aloud as if reciting a creed. What changed him? Love first, an equal who could stop him. Loss next, death, the only absolute fence. Then failure, sleep that conquered him, a serpent that stole his secure fix. Each blow forced him to accept a map of lines he did not draw. The wisdom he wins is not how to erase borders, but how to lay them where they keep life from spilling into waste. Is there kindness in this hard geometry? Yes, in maintenance. A good boundary prevents cruelties that slop outward when categories leak. Paternity disputes that become blood feuds. jealousies that burn houses, panic that drives the poor into the arms of gods who promise shortcuts and deliver exploitation. The city's stricter laws are not moral theater. They are floodgates protecting the slow work of bread and roofs. Meanwhile, sacred exceptions aren't loopholes for the powerful to play in. They are civic laboratories where dangerous forces, desire, grief, ecstasy, can be handled with gloves on, studied, honored, made useful. Modern ears chafe here. We want individual fairness where they want collective stability. We ask consent where they ask consequence. Both questions matter. Mesopotamia answers the second with mastery and the first unevenly. We can learn from the engineering without praising the whole design. We can admire the sluices and still weep for those the river took, so what endures? A pattern you can still feel under your feet in any city. Sex as current, law as canal, ritual as lock, medicine as pump, poetry as the sound water makes when it runs fast enough to sing. Cross the wrong boundary with the wrong cargo, and the system punishes you not because it hates you, but because it fears the downstream wreckage. But open the right gate at the right time, and the same power irrigates 100 fields. Here is the synthesis the tablets teach if you press them to your ear. Channel, don't deny. They did not try to make humans less human. They tried to make human heat do work. The coin that rang on linen wasn't a tip. It was a switch. The drowning clause wasn't prudery. It was a firewall. The amulet wasn't superstition. It was a plan for midnight. The poem wasn't rebellion. It was relief. The epic wasn't fantasy. It was instruction. What intimacy can build, what grief must teach, what limits will save. Stand one last time where street becomes precinct. On your left, a market that loves the honest weight of copper. On your right, an altar that loves the honest heat of breath. Between them runs a narrow lane worn smooth by sandals, the path civilization takes when it has learned humility. You cannot abolish desire. You cannot make death negotiate. You cannot live only on law. You cannot live only on song. You must keep both books, so the city writes. It writes contracts that drown ambiguity and hymns that baptize ambiguity. It writes recipes for bodies and names for shadows. It writes love in a woman's first person and justice in a king's third. It writes a story where a priestess turns a beast into a citizen and a god turns a king into a mourner. It writes, finally, a kind of prayer disguised as procedure. May the river run in its bed. May the walls hold. May the babies breathe. May the fields answer. May our borders be strong enough to guard us and soft enough to let grace through. You close the tablet. Dust glitters in the sun like ground-up stars. The ziggurat is still there, shoulder to shoulder with the sky. Somewhere a coin rings. Somewhere a law is read aloud. Somewhere an amulet taps a tiny wrist. Somewhere a poet picks up a stylus and writes honey with a smile. The city hums. The borders hold. And the river, untamable, indispensable, keeps moving, because the point was never to stop it, only to teach it how to feed the world. What do you call a civilization that invented writing, carved laws into stone, and raised mountains from mud brick, yet still lived every day as if the world could collapse with the next flood, famine, or betrayal of the gods? You call it Mesopotamia, and you call it human. The last lesson from their tablets is not about triumph, but about balance, fragile, brutal, necessary. Their brilliance lies not in erasing chaos, but in surviving alongside it. Look again at the ziggurat. It is both ladder and anchor, an attempt to stitch heaven to earth, but also to pin the city in place against forces bigger than walls. The rituals inside weren't indulgence. They were infrastructure. Without them, fields risked withering, herds risked dwindling, families risked vanishing. When a woman lay in Ishtar's precinct with a stranger, she wasn't breaking a vow. She was making one on behalf of her entire community. To us it feels alien, perhaps exploitative. To them it was civic duty wrapped in divine theater. That is the paradox you must hold if you want to hear their world honestly. Now stand at the stone pillar of Hammurabi's code. The wedge-shaped laws are sharp because the stakes were sharp. A surgeon's slip could mean losing his hands. A wife's infidelity meant drowning. A builder's collapsing roof cost his life. Mercy is rare. Order is paramount. But this cruelty was not random. It was the math of survival. The Tigris and Euphrates could bless with floods or curse with destruction. A law that punishes like lightning is an attempt to imitate the gods and keep men afraid enough to behave. Justice was not about fairness, it was about predictability. Turn the tablet and you find contradictions. temple priestesses with property and literacy in a world where most women's lives were contracts. Poems where women described passion in their own voices in a society that erased female-female desire from law. Transgressive priests who lived in gender liminality, honored in temples even as ordinary men were punished for blurring roles. Mesopotamia is not hypocrisy, it is compartmentalization, perfected. Different rules for different spaces, all held together by fear and faith that if one chamber overflowed, the whole machine would seize. Then comes Lilith and her kin, the nightmares that prove how fragile all of this order really was. The amulets on infants, the incantations muttered at dusk, the lion-headed Lamashtu skulking in visions. Even as they engineered law codes and irrigation canals, they feared that desire itself might open a gate to predators. Sex was both bridge and breach, blessing and curse. They answered with charms because clay tablets couldn't seal the cracks of the soul. To live Mesopotamian was to live inside vigilance. But life wasn't only dread. It was also love poetry whispered by reed huts, secret trysts that broke contracts but made people human. And the first epic in history daring to say that friendship between two men, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, could define not just their lives, but the very meaning of mortality.
The epic's last truth is the one Mesopotamia never forgot. You cannot defeat death.
You can only build walls high enough, poems sweet enough, and rituals fierce enough that when death arrives, it finds you already having made something that lasts longer than yourself. So what is the reckoning? That civilization is a bargain with contradictions. The sacred can live next door to the profane, the law can strangle love even as poetry frees it, and sex can civilize or condemn depending on which doorway it passes through. Mesopotamia's genius was not solving this tension, it was enduring it. That's why their bricks still rise out of desert dust, and their words still sting across 4,000 years. We stand at the same crossroads they did, between chaos and order, desire and duty, freedom and control. Our tools are different, but our struggle is not. Every contract we sign, every law we pass, every poem we write, every kiss we give is another attempt to do what they did, to balance the river that feeds us and threatens to drown us. The lesson of Mesopotamia is that you can never win that battle once and for all. You can only keep writing it into clay, keep praying it into smoke, keep singing it into memory. And so the story ends where it began, on sun-scorched earth, under an impossible blue sky, beside a ziggurat whose steps still climb into silence. Civilization did not start with perfection. It started with the courage to wrestle chaos, to fail, to grieve, to rebuild, and to leave behind words sharp enough to cut across time. We owe them more than our alphabets and our laws. We owe them the knowledge that to be human is to live forever on the edge of order, forever making meaning against the flood. One silver coin, a stranger's phrase, and a vow to the goddess. Was this exploitation, or was it prayer? In a world where rain could miss a field by the width of a city wall, the answer wasn't moral arithmetic. It was survival math. The Mesopotamian wager was simple and terrifying. If the cosmos is a living engine, you keep it oiled. You don't watch the river like a spectator. You dance with it. And when the goddess of love and war rules the water gates of life, you honor her with the most potent offering you possess, the living heat of human union. Start with sympathetic magic, the logic that like affects like. Grain swells when heaven and earth meet. Wombs quicken when bodies mirror the marriage of sky and soil. So the precinct becomes a stage where mortals echo the mythic choreography. Under flickering oil lamps, a priest's voice carves the air into ritual syllables, and a simple transaction, coin for act, turns inside out. Outside the gate, money purchases onions, beer, a tin pendant. Inside, money is not payment. It is transubstantiation. The silver speaks the goddess's name, and the act that would be private, even illicit, is lifted into the civic ledger of blessings owed and blessings sought. Listen to the invocation a stranger rehearses with dry lips. In the name of the goddess. The phrasing matters. The words don't license desire. They aim it, like angling a canal gate so flood becomes irrigation. The woman, sometimes man, in consecrated linen is not a commodity. She is an office. For a pulse-long interval, her body is deputized by the goddess. The stranger becomes a conduit, scarcely more individualized than a clay pourer under a spout. When the coin rings on cloth, it seals jurisdiction. The precinct claims the act. It is now liturgy. But didn't Herodotus lie? Modern viewers jab with this question as if history were a courtroom. The Greek traveler describes Babylonian custom with phrases that make the skin prickle: women waiting, coins tossed, duty discharged. Scholars hedge: exaggeration, misunderstanding, a ritual fossil seen through foreign eyes. Perhaps not every woman, perhaps not always, perhaps the practice shifted with centuries and dynasties. But the kernel survives across texts, hymns, and administrative fragments. Ritualized sexuality existed and was sanctioned under divine names. Its purpose was public benefit. The city didn't blush. It budgeted. Why would such a rite survive the same civic mind that carved laws to drown adulterers? Because Mesopotamia sorted reality by rooms. Households guarded lineage. Contracts guarded property. Precincts guarded fertility. Each room had rules calibrated to a risk profile. In the house, the greatest risk is stolen heirs and fractured inheritance, so law bites hard. In the precinct, the greatest risk is famine and barrenness, so ritual bites deep. Carry the same act across the threshold and it changes species. It is as if the city keeps two alphabets, one for ledgers, one for hymns. Letters repeat. Meanings do not. Notice how participants are cast. The Nadirtu and other temple women are not anonymous silhouettes in a titillating fantasy. They keep ledgers, own fields, lease laborers, write contracts with the same wedge-shaped script that records marriage dowries. Their literacy is power. Their proximity to the altar is status. When they perform, it is not as fallen figures but as specialists in a civic technology. Imagine the city as a giant mechanism. Canals, walls, granaries, courts, and this, the precinct rite, as a pressure valve for chaos. When drought gnaws the horizon, the city opens the valve and lets the goddess hear. There is a chill in the logic, yes, a machine's calm built over a human pulse. But be wary of the reflex that flattens this into a modern vice map. There is no alley here, no haggling over shame. The act is public in the sense of acknowledged, not performed for crowds. It is regulated by priests, embedded in calendars, watched by statues whose inlaid eyes catch lamplight like stars. The stranger is not picking. He is participating. The coin is not price discovery. It is ritual precision, like the exact weight of incense or the number of knots in an amulet cord. The city's poor understand the stakes in their bones. A farmer's wife has seen a year when calves slide stillborn. A brewer knows batches that turn sour. A midwife has eyes tattooed by grief. In that context, a rite that promises to tilt the odds toward abundance is not a scandal but a strategy. And because strategies demand clarity, the precinct draws hard lines. Consent here is framed by vocation, not romance. Choice is framed by office, not whim. The participants step into roles the way a king steps under a crown, aware that the object on his head is less about him than about the city that needs a focal point for power. What about desire, the body's private weather? The rite neither denies it nor centers it. It acknowledges that humans are vessels with contents, but in precinct time, the vessel matters more than the storm inside. That's why the name spoken is the goddess's and not a lover's. That's why the offering goes to the temple treasury and not a hand. That's why the language around the act is harvest and flood, not moonlit trysts. There is tenderness in love poetry and ferocity in household law. Here, there is instrumentality in the service of life. The rite's beauty is its terrifying efficiency. To modern ears, this feels like a card trick. Move the act, say the name, and suddenly taboo becomes sacrament. But that is precisely the point. Categories organize consequence. Law cannot make it rain. Romance cannot fill a granary. Magic cannot replace irrigation. Medicine cannot stop a plague by prayer alone. Mesopotamia's answer is not to crown one system, but to braid them all and assign each a sanctuary. The precinct protects a practice that would destroy a household if normalized there, and the household protects an order that would suffocate the precinct if universally imposed. The coin is the hinge, the sharp little mechanism that clicks between worlds. Consider the choreography in miniature. A stranger steps through the gate, washed, named, briefly disindividuated. A priest names the goddess, not the man. The woman's linen marks office, not personality.
Words are spoken with legal clarity, formulae that sound like contracts dressed as songs.
The coin falls. The rite proceeds. The offerings are recorded. Later, a tablet will show a tally, shekels in, barley out, oil dispensed, perhaps a lamb promised for the new moon. The city is watching not to intrude on bodies, but to make sure the engine runs and the load is balanced. If you're looking for hypocrisy, you will find compartmentalization instead. That is not an excuse. It is a diagnosis. The city's leaders knew what a loosened boundary could do. Let the precinct's categories bleed into the street, and household certainty unspools. inheritance disputes, blood feuds, the unraveling of alliances. Let the street's categories invade the precinct and the right loses charge. Desire collapses into transaction, the goddess stops listening, and fields wither under a blue, indifferent sky. So, they draw a bright line and defend it with both hymn and law. And yes, there are abuses, the shadows any power system casts. A ritual can be wielded to coerce. An office can be bent by status. A treasury can tempt thieves. The tablets mutter about scandals at the margins, priests punished, fines levied, oaths broken. But the core logic remains resilient because the city keeps seeing results it can narrate. Babies born after famine years, herds swelling, floodwaters that come just high enough. Correlation becomes cosmology. Cosmology becomes ritual. Ritual becomes calendar. Calendar becomes identity. You are the people who can ask the goddess for rain, and sometimes hear an answer. Before you judge, count your own thresholds. We too move acts across lines and rename them. Therapy and confession, nightlife and festival, contract and vow. We too use money to sanctify, membership dues, charity pledges, rings that are both jewelry and covenant. The Mesopotamian difference is candor. They put the right at civilization's heart and said aloud what many cultures hide. Bodies are part of the city's toolkit. Now return to the sound that started this part, a coin kissing linen. It is such a small music for so grand a claim, but small mechanisms steer big machines. That ring is a switch flipped from private to sacred, from risk to ritual, from whim to work. It is a hinge made of silver and story. If this feels unstable, good. The city is balancing on a blade and you should feel the cut. Because on another tablet, in another room, a law waits with a river at its back. The same culture that sanctifies union under a goddess will drown an adulterous pair without a hymn. Why the difference? Because the city is not a single story. It is a braid. Follow me to the stone pillar where the braid hardens into rules, where marriage is a contract and desire is debt. The goddess guards one door. The law bars another. And between them, civilization walks a very narrow street. 7.5 feet of polished basalt stands like a thunderhead in the sun. At its crown, a king receives a rod and ring from a seated god, symbol of measurement and justice. Then below, line after relentless line, 282 decisions incised in cuneiform, the city's spine pressed into stone. This is not philosophy. This is operating procedure for a fragile world. Prices, wages, fines, surgeries gone wrong, wall collapses, flood damage. And where the text bites hardest, marriage, inheritance, and the perilous traffic of desire. Begin with the transaction that makes strangers kin. Marriage here is not a mystery of romance, but a merger of households with assets on the line. A father negotiates bride price. A dowry is tallied, garments, silver, servant, perhaps a plot of barley land. The scribes record it all, names, gods invoked, witnesses present, curses for violation. The tablet is a machine. Once fired, its words cannot rot, and the future must bend around it. The dowry remains the woman's property in principle, but passes into the husband's management in practice. The city protects her stake because it protects continuity of children, of fields, of debts that expect heirs to pay them. Virginity in this calculus is not halo, but warranty. It certifies paternity, the clean line from seed to son to field. If the seal is broken before the contract, the math no longer holds. So the code provides remedies with the chill of a bookkeeper. If a man marries and discovers the claim false, he may dissolve the union, return the bride to her father, reclaim what was paid. If deceit is proven, disgrace cleaves to the household that tried to pass a counterfeit heir-bearing vessel as intact. Not because a god's anger is roused, though the gods loom behind every clause, but because property flows through bloodlines, and bloodlines demand certainty. Now read the clause that makes listeners flinch even today. If a man's wife is caught lying with another man, they shall bind them and throw them into the water. The text allows for royal mercy if the husband chooses to forgive, but the default is drowning. Why? Because the primary injury is not romantic betrayal. It is the theft of an heir. An adulterous pregnancy roots another man's future into your lineage, smuggling a rival's seed into your field. The river's judgment is more than execution. It is purification, a civic attempt to wash away a contamination of lines. Notice the asymmetry that modern ears call hypocrisy and the code calls categories. A married man's liaisons with a slave he owns, a concubine he supports, or a consecrated woman in a temple precinct do not register as adultery. He has not endangered another patriarch's line. He has not invaded another contract's center. But if he beds another man's wife, the law sees not pleasure but trespass, violation of a guarded boundary that protects inheritance. The city's anxiety is not eros. It is expropriation. The language of seals and thresholds stalks the text. Doors are sacred because they separate jurisdictions. So are veils, so are marriage contracts, so are temple gates. When a woman crosses from father's house to husband's, she passes through a ritual that stamps her status like a cylinder seal rolls its story on wet clay. Her sexuality becomes exclusive property, not because the city despises the body, but because it must guarantee the name on the next tablet, the one that will distribute fields among sons, apportion support to widows, name guardians for minors, and keep the tax collectors' lists sane. What of the woman's rights? The code is not tender, but it is not blind. If a husband neglects his wife, denies her food, clothing, conjugal duty, she may seek release. If he is captured in war and fails to return, after time and proof she may remarry without penalty. If he divorces her without cause, he must pay. If with cause, the penalties shift. If she brings a dowry, that dowry or its value must be returned. The city is not chasing fairness as modern ethics would name it. It is chasing stability. A desertion creates cracks in the social wall. The code stuffs those cracks with silver. The same arithmetic governs the grim theater of accusation. If a woman is suspected of adultery without proof, the code does not permit a husband to kill her outright. It assigns ordeal trial by river. She swears innocence, enters the current, and the God who sees all is trusted to decide. Survive, and she returns vindicated. Sink, and the city claims the justice it believes the divine has delivered. We shudder at the terror of it. But see the logic. The king outsources unknowable truth to a higher jurisdiction because he cannot let suspicion devour households with vendetta. Contracts extend their fingers into the nursery. If a wife cannot bear children, a man may take a second woman. The code choreographs this without tearing the first marriage apart. The first wife retains rank. The second is slotted into law in a way that keeps property flows legible. If a concubine bears sons, what portion? The tablet knows. If a man dies, what of the widow's dowry? The tablet knows. If the sons fight over orchards, what witness seals were present on the grant that started the argument? The tablet knows. The code does not trust memory. It trusts fired clay. Watch how punishment maps onto risk. A negligent builder whose house collapses and kills the owner is executed. If it kills the owner's son, the builder's son dies. The symmetry is brutal algebra. In the sexuality clauses, the same math. If you endanger a line, your line pays. If you confuse categories, the river clarifies them with force. Underneath the cruelty lies a terrified clarity about fragility. A city can be broken by false airs as surely as by shoddy bricks. Is there room in this stone jungle for tenderness? Not much, not here. But the law's silence is not the culture's. Love poems murmur elsewhere, and temple rites convert desire to sacrament in another room. The point of the code is to keep households legible so that markets can function, armies can muster, irrigation crews can be counted, and the gods can be paid what is due. In that sense, Law 129 is not an obsession with sex. It is an obsession with accounting. Who owns what? Whose son is he? Which field goes to which name? Drown ambiguity. You can feel the city learning the cost of exceptions. Suppose a precedent lets a wife's infidelity slide without consequence, and a child of uncertain paternity inherits a barley field that backs a canal maintenance duty. The crew is short by one plow team. The canal silt rises. A late flood backs into a district. Barley rots. Prices jump. Bakers cut loaves thin. Soldiers grow lean. The king looks at the sky and then at the courts. What looks like a bedroom transgression scales into famine math. The code is a firewall against cascading failure, and yet, return to that carved relief at the pillar's top. The god extends a ring and rod, tools for measuring straight lines and fair weights. Justice here is not empathy. It is calibration. The cylinder seal that a merchant rolls across a wet tablet to sign his name is the same instrument a bride's family rolls on a marriage contract. The impression says, "This is mine, this is true, this will stand." In such a world, desire is not suppressed so much as bracketed. It is given a precinct, a calendar, a hymn. Outside those brackets, the line must hold. This is why the city can both sanctify a union in a temple and drown a union in a river without feeling the tremor of contradiction. Different doors, different ledgers, different gods, even if the names are shared. The law does not speak of love or lust because it speaks of boundaries and ownership, risk and replacement cost. It is the cold hand that steadies the arm that lights the incense. The coin we heard fall in the last part turns up again here, but as evidence, proof of offering, not price of pleasure. Tablets record temple treasuries with the same dry care they record dowries. The city's two hearts pump through one writing system. That is the genius of the invention. Script that can bear hymns and invoices, curses and clauses, love lines and death penalties. On it, the king writes the world he wants to survive, and yet the code's perfect geometry keeps colliding with human weather. People will love outside contracts. People will lie. People will suffer and petition and bargain with gods and judges alike. The law can drown a pair, but it cannot drown longing. Which is why other tablets exist, songs, letters, medical recipes, speaking where the stone cannot. The city will try to route desire through pipes and valves. Desire will seep and sometimes flood. For now, stand by the pillar and feel its chill. This is the city saying, we will not let the river of life rewrite our ledgers at night. We will name heirs by clay, not by rumor. We will fix prices for hands and oxen, and also for kisses that break contracts. We will bind and throw if we must, because the granary depends on it. Then, when you have learned how hard they hold the line, step back toward the precinct where the line bends, where the goddess keeps a different book and love writes in a different tense. Priestesses with ledgers. Veils that open doors, not close them. Step into the quarter where holiness wears a signet ring. If the marketplace runs on barley and copper, this district runs on vows, contracts, and a goddess's dangerous favor. Here the word prostitute collapses under its own anachronism. The women you meet are officials. Their ink is black. Their math is sharp. Their sanctity is not softness. It is jurisdiction. Start with the name that sounds like a whisper on fired clay, Nud-2. Not a single job title, but a cluster of statuses anchored to temples, cities, and gods. Their biographies are not morality plays. They are balance sheets, court cases, land grants. A Nud-2 can own orchards and rent them out. She can lend silver at interest. She can sue and be sued. She can witness contracts and leave a will. Picture her cylinder seal, a procession before a goddess, a cuneiform caption, a carved border like braided water. She rolls it across wet clay, and a story appears that men must honor. How does this power coexist with the familiar cage of marriage law? It doesn't, not directly. Many Nud-2 are vowed away from ordinary marriage. Their sexuality is redirected or restricted depending on city and century. Some live in cloister-like compounds with their own treasuries. Some dwell in family houses but answer to temple administrators. Some engage in ritual roles that modern ears try and fail to file under sex work. The point is not a universal template. The point is that the precinct creates alternative lanes for female agency, lanes that are policed, yes, but real, paved, and trafficked. Follow the silver. A Nud-2 inherits or receives dowry-like endowments, orchards, fields, slaves, silver, transferred into temple orbit. She leases a date grove to a merchant consortium. The tablet lists rent in measures of fruit due at harvest, penalties for shortfall. She loans a fisherman 2 shekels to repair nets. Repayment is secured by a pledge of catch. She litigates when a neighbor shifts a boundary stone, her case argued by a male kin or an agent, adjudicated by elders, witnessed by scribes whose styluses clack like insect legs. If she dies, her portfolio may revert to her natal family or to the temple, depending on the terms. Her body may be hedged by vows. Her property is an athlete. Now set this economy against the precinct's rights and watch categories braid. Within the temple's shadow, sexuality is a public technology, carefully named, carefully taxed, carefully insulated from the household sphere. If a Nud-2 or another consecrated woman participates in a rite of sacred union, the payment is not wage but offering. The beneficiary is not a private individual, but the goddess's treasury. The justification is not desire but fertility for city and field. The participant's dignity derives from office. They wear linen not as lure but as uniform. When the act is over, the accounting resumes. A scribe tallies shekels, lists oil expenditures, notes the new moon's approach. It is both sacrament and administration, a duet that Mesopotamia sings in its sleep. Does this mean the precinct is a feminist utopia? No. The walls are built from patriarchy's bricks even when the rooms feel different. A Nadatu's freedom is jurisdictional, not absolute. Her contracts often require male countersignature. Her mobility can be limited. Her vow can be policed with penalties that bite. But within that architecture, she bends space. She can protect a sister's dowry by investing it in land that throws shade 10 months a year. She can shelter a nephew's apprenticeship under her seal. She can fund a canal cleaning in exchange for tax relief carved on a tablet the size of a palm. When famines come, it matters who has reserves. Temples do. There is a civic genius in this arrangement that modern polemics miss. By diverting a fraction of daughters into temple service and property management, the city spreads risk. Households that might implode under the demands of dowry and inheritance get a pressure valve. Temples accumulate capital that can stabilize grain prices, bankroll public works, and endow rituals believed to secure the rains. The Nadatu is a node in that network, an agent whose sanctity legitimizes her balance sheet. Watch her at work. Morning, she confers with a scribe over a delinquent tenant. The tablet names dates and default interest. Midday, she receives a petition from a widow whose bride price was swallowed by a feud. The Nadatu promises a small loan from temple funds. Barley today, repayment after harvest with a lamb in kind. Afternoon, she attends a rite in a subsidiary chapel, where a hymn is sung in Sumerian older than the city's walls. Offerings are weighed, smoke sketched into the rafters. Evening. She inspects a boundary wall in her orchard, notes a crumbling course, instructs a foreman to hire 3 men for repairs at the standard wage. None of this is fantasy. It is how the precinct keeps a city alive, through contracts and smoke, ledgers and song. Now place her opposite the household bride whose body is a vault for lineage. The bride's assets move into a marriage contract. The Nadatu's assets orbit a temple contract. The bride's sexuality is gated by a husband's exclusive claim. The Nadatu's sexuality is coded by ritual or by abstention depending on her vow. The bride risks drowning if she violates the household ledger. The Nadatu risks penalties if she violates the temples. Different doors. Different bookkeepers. Different gods lighting the same night with different lamps. Is there intimacy here, or only instruments? Listen closely to the hymns sung by women in precinct space, and you'll hear heat braided into order. Praise for Inanna Ishtar is not merely a chant list. It is a body speaking with civic grammar. She who loves the song is also she who loosens the girdle. The Nadatu's power isn't cold. It is conducted heat, channeled desire, domesticated risk, a lightning rod in linen. She stands where 2 dangers meet, the chaos of unruled sexuality and the brittleness of law without relief. She is the hinge that keeps the city from cracking under either. Critics will ask, isn't this just exploitation with better stationery? Sometimes yes. Any system that concentrates power accrues parasites. There are tablets that whisper of embezzling priests, of women compelled, of families scheming to dump inconvenient daughters into vows that serve paternal interests. But the archive also testifies to agency. Women suing for delayed rents, refusing unfair terms, reclaiming property from feckless brothers, funding repairs when men fled plague, keeping lists when kings died and courts went silent. The very fact we can read these lives because they wrote and were written about means they weren't shadows. They cast shadows, returned to the coin that rang on linen. In precinct logic, that coin is a syllable addressed to the goddess. In ledger logic, it is an increment that can become barley in a widow's basket 2 months from now. The Nadatu understands both grammars. She will sign the disbursement tablet with her seal after the rite and sleep under a vow that makes her a symbol by day and an accountant by night. She is not free in a modern way. She is effective in an ancient one. The city does not measure liberty as we do. It measures throughput, water, grain, births, justice. By that metric, the Nadatu's office is a pump. Notice, too, how her existence blunts the sharpest edge of household law without dulling it. Because the city reserves a sacral lane for sexuality and a sacral lane for female property, it can condemn adultery at home without denying the body's civic uses. The Nadatu's very presence says to the bride, your vow is enforced because another vow exists elsewhere to carry the cosmic load. And it says to the husband, your property rights are secure because the goddess's rights are serviced by officers who are not your wives. It is, in its own stern way, an ethic. Stand, finally, in the heat outside her compound and watch commerce flow like a river split around an island. On one bank, the baker weighs dough. On the other, a priest measures oil for lamps. In the channel between, Anada too crosses with a tablet under her arm and a hymn in her throat. She belongs to a system that dared to cage chaos without killing it, to loan it money at a reasonable rate, to hire it for festivals, to bless it when the sky turned brass. If that sounds cold, remember the alternative: panic, famine, vendetta. The precinct's calculus is ruthless in service of life. The next time someone tosses the word temple prostitute like a sneer, hand them a cylinder seal. Let them roll it and watch a woman's authority appear in miniature: goddess, worshipper, ledger. Tell them her coin could become barley, her vow could become rain, her signature could move labor in a week when the city needed hands. Then turn them toward the smaller tablets, poems in a woman's voice tasting honey, and remind them that none of this machinery erased desire. It engineered it. And because machines require maintenance, the city keeps another toolkit: healers who mix herbs, ritualists who knot cords, physicians who write down remedies in the same script that records rents. When the body stutters, the precinct does not moralize. It intervenes. She writes, "I tasted your honey. Not duty, desire, no witnesses, no weights and measures, just a heartbeat scratched in wedges across a clay shard the size of a palm." If the stone pillar told you what must not be done, these little tablets dare to tell you what was. They do not ask the city for permission. They ask a lover to come at dusk, start with the shock of voice. In a world where contracts roar and kings carve their victories in stone, the love lyrics murmur in the first person, often female. A woman counts the freckles on a man's back like stars, names his scent in a language that never once says property. She does not speak in terms of bride price or dowry. She speaks in terms of breath and skin. "My beloved," she says, Sumerian syllables that sound like rain across reeds. He is not a husband in a ledger. He is a gazelle, a storm, the cool shade of a date palm when the noon sun eats the streets. These lines do not live on monumental basalt. They live on teaching tablets, on hymn collections tucked into temple libraries, on fragments reused in house walls. A scribe's apprentice practicing neat columns copies a stanza between columns of grain accounts. A priestess preserves a festival hymn that slips halfway through into a love song addressed to a god in the voice of a woman. The city cannot keep categories perfectly apart. Some of the river seeps. In these poems, the seepage is the point. Listen to the staging. The chosen ground is not a courtroom, but a reed hut out by the water where frogs click like beads and a breeze plays patterns on the river's shoulder. Lovers agree on codes: 2 coughs to signal the path is clear, a scrap of dyed wool tied to a branch. She speaks of slipping away from the courtyard where relatives tally loaves and gossip about in-laws. He arrives smelling of dust and barley in the last of the day's heat. They drink a little beer from a clay cup and, careful now, the poem looks aside not to blur but to bless. What matters to this poet is not anatomy, but atmosphere. That feeling of the world narrowing to the square of mat beneath you and widening, simultaneously into a sky so large you forget your own name. Some poems braid sanctity into this secrecy, not temple rite, but metaphor so hot it smokes. The lover is a god for a stanza. The body becomes a field where rain remembers it as water. She praises his plow, yes, but the metaphor refuses to be a smirk. It insists on creation's dignity, the way wheat stands up straight after a storm passes and the sun comes out slow like forgiveness. You can almost hear the editor in a later century trying to file this under agricultural imagery and missing that the poem will not sit still. It is too alive. Courage lives here. The same society that could drown adulterers bred women who could write in a tone that would blister paint. Not every voice survived. Not every voice existed. Literacy always clusters near power. But even copied by male scribes, the perspective has the heat of a room where the door is braced with a stool and laughter keeps boiling over like a pot left just a moment too long on coals. He is sweet, she says, and the tablet is suddenly not a record. It is a pulse. Notice the grammar of choice. These are not arrangements made by uncles. They are invitations. Come, the poem says, and the imperative is sovereign. The woman does not ask for permission. She sets a time. She doesn't ask for a ring. She asks for a reed hut rendezvous before dawn scuffs the sky. In a culture of contracts, these stanzas stage a micro-kingdom of consent. It is temporary and dangerous and piercingly alive. Do these poems undercut the law? No. They work in a shadow the code cannot reach, a logic of hours rather than heirs. The household must remain legible at noon. The poem belongs to the margins of the day, dusk, dawn, festival nights when drums make the streets feel elastic. The city knows these margins exist. It just doesn't legislate them until a pregnancy or a quarrel yanks the secret into noon's harsh geometry. The poetry makes no promises about consequence. It only insists on truth, that a human being can be both an asset in a contract and a creature of fierce longing, and that both states feel like destiny while they last. If you want to hear technique, listen to the metaphors stack like jars, honey and milk, cedar and myrrh, the mouth as a seal that leaves a mark like a cylinder roll on clay. The poets steal the city's imagery and flip it. A kiss becomes a legal impression, not to bind two houses, but to certify a moment was real. Breath is counted like barley. Eyes are weighed like silver. Love takes the vocabulary of property and spends it on feeling. There is mischief here too, the small wicked joy of outwitting systems that overreach. One poem paints a mother-in-law as a human lock, always listening. Another turns a scolding ant into a sparrow whose chatter can be drowned with laughter and a doorbolt. The humor is not crude. It is strategic. It makes space where there isn't any. It plants a garden in the corner of a courtyard paved with law. Now, a harder truth. For every reed hut lyric that ends in kisses and dawn, another ends in ache. Distance and delay, the lover called away to haul bricks for a city wall, the lover drafted to march with a levy against a rival's canal. He promises to return by the next moon. She keeps the mat rolled in a corner and touches it with her foot when no one is watching. The poem becomes a warehouse for hope. My heart, she writes, no grand metaphor, just the fact of an organ that won't change its rhythm to suit a calendar. These songs do not pretend that secrecy is safe. The stakes are as old as the city, a slip of timing, a neighbor's eye, a pregnancy that will not be ignored. And so the poems also whisper about remedies. Herbs bruised with a pestle and mixed with honey, a pessary of plant gum, a prayer to a goddess who knows women's rooms because she loves to invade them. Now we are at the edge of another archive entirely, where medicine and magic share a table and beer is a solvent for more than thirst. The poems don't give recipes. They nod toward the room next door where recipes live. Before we step there, pause with the sensation these texts deliver across 4,000 years. Recognition. You know this ache. You know the way a day glows when a promise sits in its middle like a hot coal. You know the stupid courage that sends a note. The wild arithmetic of risk versus need. The skill of reading a household's weather and slipping through to a corner of quiet. You know the sentences bodies make when they finally get to speak directly to each other. That's the scandal. Not that ancient people felt as we do, but that they admitted it where we could find it. The city's machine makes room for this confession by not noticing it until it must. That is a kind of wisdom. You cannot legislate the humidity out of summer. You cannot legislate longing out of people. You can punish what breaks the threshold. You can bless what serves the fields. Between those poles, language does work the courts cannot. It comforts, excites, organizes memory. It says you are not alone in wanting. It says there has always been a time after the market closes when something more important happens. Let one more stanza slide across the desk before we move on. My beloved is a garden. She lists specific trees, date, fig, pomegranate, and specific paths, narrow, shaded, a twist where you duck your head. She is not composing an allegory. She is giving directions. Desire in these poems is not a theory. It is a map. You can walk it. You can arrive. And when arrival stutters, when the body fails to match the heart, when fear shrinks blood to a thread, when grief sours appetite, the same culture that wrote hymns and laws wrote treatments. That is where we go next, to the physicians who wrote with the same script as poets, to the ritualists who knotted cords to tie down nightmares, to the recipes that mixed herbs with beer and words with breath. The love poetry has shown us the heat. Now we will learn how they tried to carry that heat without burning the house down. One last whisper for the road. The poems do not apologize. They dare to say pleasure is a truth worth recording. They do not sneer at marriage. They do not overthrow the code. They simply carve a small, stubborn sanctuary where two names mean more than two families. In a civilization obsessed with keeping lines straight, the love lyric is a beautiful curve, and sometimes curves are how rivers reach the sea. Impotence isn't a joke here. It's a breach in the city's plumbing. When a man's body won't answer, an inheritance goes dim, a marriage turns brittle, a household's math slips. So the Mesopotamians treat sex not as gossip, but as infrastructure. If a gate jams, you grease it. If a channel clogs, you clear it. If a wall leaks, you bind it with pitch and prayer. They built clinics for the flesh and workshops for the unseen, and they staffed both. Meet the Asu, the physician with hands that smell of herbs and beer. His kit is unromantic. Mortars, pestles, clay jars stoppered with wax, reeds cut to measure, a knife bright enough to shame sunlight. He works in verbs: bruise, simmer, strain, smear. A man arrives ashamed and angry, calling it loss of manliness. The Asu does not laugh. He notes symptoms. Is it night only or day both? Sudden or creeping? He asks about drink, fever, grief, labor. Then he writes, dates pounded to paste mixed with sesames and a splash of beer, a paste of onions and oil rubbed on thighs, a draught of goat's milk boiled with mint at dawn for 7 mornings. The patient leaves with a tablet tucked into his belt and hope warm in his chest like a coal. Next door works the Ashipu, the ritual expert who tunes the air. His tools are different: string for knots, figurines to hold a sickness the way a clay jar holds water, incense cakes, a bowl of river silt, a vocabulary of names not spoken outside the rite. He diagnoses with dreams and omens. Did a shadow sit on your chest? Did you wake with your heart hammering like a smith's? He is not a skeptic of the Asu. He is a complement. Where the physician treats the pipe, the Ashipu treats the pressure inside it. He will lay a reed mat, draw a boundary in flour, speak an incantation that has crossed centuries intact, and ask a god to untie what fear has knotted. Often, the same patient sees both. The culture is not embarrassed by redundancy. It is invested in outcomes. If the potion fails, let the prayer carry the surplus. If the prayer stalls, let the salve finish the run. A wife can beg a goddess at dawn, then hand her husband a cup that stings the tongue at dusk. Survival prefers both and. Infertility is treated with the same mix of brass tacks and breath. A couple comes with eyes like winter, and the Asu listens as if they were reporting flood heights. He prescribes warmth, baths scented with cedar, a poultice of crushed fennel and honey placed low, a schedule that respects the rhythm of the month. He has pessaries, little plugs dipped in mixtures whose logic is clear even if the chemistry is guessed. Honey for its cleansing sweetness. Acacia for the sour bite it ferments into, a lactic tang that bullies seed. Natron for dryness. Wool to carry and hold. Prevent when needed. Invite when desired. He does not moralize about either. He records outcomes. There are recipes not for making babies, but for dodging them. The city knows the catastrophe of an unclaimed child, a girl cast out, a boy named no one's, a grandmother who has to choose between feeding 2 mouths or 1. So the texts do not pretend ignorance. They whisper of pessaries set before a festival night, of drinks steeped with bitter plants taken after a mistake, of kneeling at a shrine asking a goddess to close the gate until the harvest is over. The risks are real and sometimes deadly. Dosage is guesswork, plants have teeth, but the aim is not sin management. It is crisis management. Desire itself gets attention as if it were weather you could coax. There are aphrodisiacs whose recipes read like a love poem disguised as a grocery list. Dates pounded with pistachios, sesame pressed to oil, a dusting of fragrant resin, a handful of pomegranate kernels smashed until they look like rubies and taste like sunlight. The Asu calls it medicine. The Ashipu calls it an offering to the body's spirits. The couple calls it supper and takes each other's hands. When a man's courage deserts him at the wrong moment, the Ashipu offers a rite that is half neurology, half theater. He binds 3 knots in a cord: fear, doubt, haste, then loosens them one by one while speaking names of gods who are good at opening things: canal gates, wombs, city doors at dawn. He rubs oil along the spine to invite heat to rise. He places a figurine at the room's threshold to catch any demon that might sneak in wearing Nightmare's cloak. The patient breathes and the breath learns a slower music. Call it placebo if you want. The culture calls it alignment. Women are not afterthoughts on these tablets. There are instructions for painful menses, warm compresses, teas that taste like green and riverbank, exercises that look suspiciously like prayers. There are formulas for afterbirth retention, for fevers of childbed, for the low hunger that follows miscarriage, a hunger that is more grief than appetite. The writers do not scold a bleeding woman for failing at destiny. They bring her broth. Some prescriptions will be wrong. Some incantations will be smoke without fire. That is baked into the clay, a civilization writing in the dark, feeling for switches. But the effort has a tone that startles respect. Sex is not a joke or a sin. It is a system that needs maintenance. When you honor it, households hold. When you neglect it, a crack runs from bedroom to granary. The city's bureaucracy hums along beside the clinic. Temple treasuries underwrite treatments for those who cannot pay, especially if an omen warned of drought. The logic being that every womb counts when barley may be thin. Guilds sometimes sponsor public baths. Midwives keep their own tiny archives, tallying survivals, remembering herbs that helped. Knowledge travels not by manifesto but by neighbor. A grandmother shows a bride how to brew a certain tea and ties a knot in her mind so she won't forget. Notice how language carries power in both rooms. The Asu's tablet is all terse verbs and quantities. The Ashipu's text is poetry that bends reality by naming it differently. You hear refrains: what is bound is loosed, what is closed is opened, what is cold is warmed. These are not metaphors to the practitioner. They are handles. The human machine is responsive to nouns and numbers, but also to story. Tell a body it is safe, and sometimes it believes you enough to become true. Then there is fear, the invisible contagion. Men wake to sweat and shame, certain something has stolen them in the night. Women sleep with lamps burning low, afraid a hand not made of flesh will touch the cradle. The clinic cannot answer all of this with roots and oils. Something else is needed, an enemy with a name, a map of how it moves, a set of countermeasures that can be taught to every household until even children can chant them while tying a charm around a cousin's ankle. The Ashipu obliges. He opens a box of myths the way a smith opens a coal's bed and shakes it awake. In those stories, desire has a shadow. Spill seed for nothing and something comes to take the surplus. Leave a door unblessed and something slips in with a whisper and a claw. Some nights a figure with wings and talons crouches on the roof ridge and watches for first cries. The names vary by city and century, but the shape repeats: beautiful, hungry, air dark. You might call her anxiety or night terror. They call her Lilith. It is no accident that the demon shows up in the clinic's orbit. The place where bodies fail or fear most is exactly where a culture will personify harm. A demon is a problem you can plan against. So the Ashipu teaches: hang an amulet carved with a snarling dwarf who terrifies terrors. Mark the bed with chalk. Put a charm bracelet on the infant's wrist. Burn incense at dusk. Say the names that make the air bristle with allies. He tells stories where the demon is outwitted by laughter, by stubbornness, by a mother's ordinary courage. And the Asu, practical to the bone, nods and says, also, keep the room warm, keep the mother fed, change the linens, boil the water, watch the breathing. Together they make a canopy over the bed, one woven from recipes, one from words. Sometimes it holds. Sometimes grief blows through anyway, and the city mourns with clay and black ribbon. But the attempt matters. It says, the body is the city in miniature, and we will defend both with everything we have: plants, prayers, payments, songs. We have tuned pipes and strung chords and filled cups. We have staffed rooms for the seen and the unseen. Yet night still has teeth. If the clinic is the place where fear is domesticated, the next room is where fear grows feathers and a name. Step with me into the dark where lamps burn all night and amulets tick softly against ankles. The midwives are awake. The priests are awake. And something else is, too. She who hunts at the edge of the crib and in the corners of dreams. Say her name softly. The city does. Say it softly, Lilith. The name moves like a moth in lamplight, flutter, shadow, gone, and returns when the house is quiet enough to hear your own blood. It is not philosophy. It is midnight triage. A city that can weigh silver to a grain and carve laws on stone still has to get through the dark, and the dark has a personality. It slips through roofs with the easy arrogance of air. It knows cradles. It knows dreams. So the Mesopotamians build a second wall inside the house, not of brick, but of names. First, the profile. She is beautiful in the way of storms, all edge, all appetite. Wings like a hawk's, fingers with ideas of their own, feet that end not in toes but in talons that write on clay none can read. Men blame her for waking spent and ashamed, as if a thief had come in the night and stolen something tender. Women know her as a cold breath at the nape, a pressure on the chest when they are too tired to cry. Babies cannot tell you what visits them. Mothers infer it from silence. The healers refuse to leave this unnamed. The Ashipu lays his tablets like a map. Here are the routes the night takes, here the doors it prefers, here the moments it loves, between lamp trimming and first sleep, between feeding and dawn. He does not lecture about superstition. He issues procedures. Tie a red cord with 3 knots at the bed's foot. Chalk a line across the doorway and speak it into being. This is a boundary. Hang a small plaque where a squat, scowling protector sticks out his tongue at evil. Stash a figurine beneath the mattress, a god who eats demons for breakfast. The ritual is housekeeping with teeth. Lilith is not alone. The world crawls with minor predators. The Lelu who lean on women like a memory they didn't choose. The incubi who pretend to be a beloved's shadow. And worst of all, Lamashtu, lion-headed, long-fingered, bracelets of snakes coiled round her wrists. She does not seduce. She takes. Milk dries under her gaze. Cradles become altars to stillness. She stalks the borders where all births take place, the line between water and breath, between womb and air, between name and the nameless. The city hates her with a practicality that feels like prayer. The countermeasures are specific. If Lamashtu prowls, you invite a thug to the door. Pazuzu, ugly as a broken wall and just as useful, a wind demon with a grin like a cracked jar. You hang his image over the bed not because he is kind, but because he hates her more than you do. Enemies can be hired. The Ashipu chants their rivalry like a legal brief. You two have history. Make some tonight. The air shifts. The baby sleeps. Or doesn't. The point is action. Do something and do it together, so fear has fewer rooms to multiply in. Consider the amulet, not jewelry, but logistics. A sliver of metal or clay, a carved dwarf or a penned line of words, tied to an infant's wrist with thread rubbed in protective oil. Its weight is almost nothing. Its meaning is a brick. The mother watches that little circle knock softly against her child's skin with each breath and feels, if not certainty, then a treaty with uncertainty. The treaty says, we see you, knight. We are not passive. We know your names, and names change how things behave. This is theology as operations manual. The ritual texts read like mixtures of poetry and troubleshooting guides. If in the night she presses upon the sleeper, if in the cradle she reaches forth her hand, then do this. Burn a specific incense whose smoke tastes like resin and old trees. Pour a libation into the dust at the threshold so thirsty spirits drink there and not at the crib. Recite a list of the goddess's titles until the one you need wakes like a guard on a night shift. The house becomes a small temple for an hour, and the family, without changing clothes, becomes priesthood. Men are not spared the night's attentions. They dream of lovers with impossible faces. They wake with the sour certainty that something took what should have planted futures. The Asu treats their bodies. The Ashipu treats their shame. He teaches a banishing that is half cognitive behavioral therapy, half spell. Name the fear. Give it a mouth so it can answer back when you tell it to go. Rinse hands in water, watching worry run away like silt. Tie a knot called swift mind. Untie a knot called quickening. Breathe until you can count your own ribs without flinching. The man who blushed to speak now has a script to read when he cannot think. Scripts rescue people. Do these rites work? Ask the women who sleep for the first time in a week. The men whose shoulders loosen by a finger's width. The infants who pass the perilous first month. Some outcomes are chemistry, a warm room, boiled water, clean cloths. Some outcomes are psychology. A mind given a job stops gnawing itself. Some outcomes are luck shaped into a story. The culture refuses to separate these two neatly. It is busy with results. There is, too, a pedagogy of thresholds. Mothers and midwives teach girls how to mark them. Doors, beds, bellies, the moment after a child's first cry when the world listens hard to hear whether the second cry comes. Thresholds must be watched. Men in courts watch boundaries between fields with tablets and seals. Women in houses watch boundaries between breaths with songs and oil. Both kinds of watching keep the city alive. The songs matter. You can hear them if you stand in a quiet street at night. Low, repetitive, more rhythm than melody. They name the baby's parts the way a builder names a wall's courses. Head is warm. Hands are full. Feet are clever. Some verses are silly on purpose, tripwires for laughter because laughter, too, is apotropaic. It turns the face away. If fear is a straight line to a crib, humor is a bend in the road. The demon stumbles. The family gets another hour. Sometimes the enemy is not outside. Grief lodges in the body like a shard. A woman who has lost a child feels the house itself sneer at her, as if bricks could vote. The Ashipu does not permit this slander. He prescribes purifications that are as much for architecture as for soul. Brush lintels with cedar oil. Pour water from a new jug into each room's corner. Open shutters at dawn and speak the baby's name. not to recall a ghost, but to place love in the air where it can be breathed by the living. The house learns, again, how to be a house. If all this sounds like the city is fighting an enemy it invented, you have never sat up with someone you love through a long night and tried to keep your head. The point is not correctness. The point is participation. These rites turn terror into chores. They assign tasks to hands that would otherwise wring themselves raw. They borrow authority from gods to make a parent feel less alone. They are merciful fictions that sometimes intercept the real. And here is the pivot. Fear made an enemy of the night, but myth also made an ally of sex. The same culture that gives Lilith wings gives a priestess a mandate to tame a creature more dangerous than any demon, the wildness in a man who does not yet belong to a city. It sends not a soldier with a spear, but a woman with a body and a curriculum. She will perform a rite that does not banish shadow. It teaches it to cast shade in the right direction. She will turn appetite into education. Her name is Shamhat. The text will say she lay with a beast man for 6 days and 7 nights, but what it means is that she taught him how to belong. Through kisses and bread, through beer and the astonishing softness of being held, she will civilize the chaos that terrified shepherds and hunters. Lilith haunts the bed. Shamhat blesses it. One steals breath. The other teaches speech. Before dawn, the house settles. Charms tick against wrists. Smoke threads the rafters and slips out where roof meets night. Somewhere a mother finally sleeps. Somewhere else, a messenger runs for a temple woman with eyes like law and hands like harvest. The city is not naive. It knows monsters and it knows medicine. It also knows this. Sometimes the truest cure for fear is a story in which a human body is the instrument that makes a human being. Come to the edge of the wild with me. The waterhole waits. The reeds bow and hiss. Hoofprints print the mud like writing in a script older than cuneiform. A figure moves among the animals as if he were an animal himself. He does not yet know bread or beer or shame or law. What he will learn next will divide his life forever into before and after. The teacher has already begun her walk. Gilgamesh doesn't send a warrior. He sends a woman. In a world that measures strength by spears and walls, this is either madness or mastery. The hunter's traps lie empty because a wild man, hair-matted, knee-storm strong, undoes them with the innocence of wind. He belongs to no household, signs no contract, pays no god. The king of Uruk hears and calculates. You do not kill a flood, you canal it. So he chooses an instrument fit for the task, a priestess whose body is both curriculum and covenant. Her name is Shamhat. She walks out of the city carrying more than perfume. She carries a grammar. The waterhole is a mirror where animals come to read themselves. Enkidu drinks beside gazelles as if he were their brother. When he sees Shamhat, something ancient in him startles. The poem wastes no breath on coyness. They join, and the joining takes time measured by sacred numbers, 6 days and 7 nights, long enough for weather to change its mind. This is not a trick or a snare. It is pedagogy disguised as pleasure, civilization taught at the pace of breath. Afterward, he turns to run with his animals. They smell a border he cannot smell and bolt. He tries to follow, and his knees betray him. The muscle that belonged to sprint and buck now belongs to standing upright for long talk. Loss announces itself first. The wild will not have him. But then understanding arrives. The text says he has grown wise. In Mesopotamia, that word is not a candle over a desk. It is a change in the body. He feels the weight of his name. He feels time like a river with banks. He begins to look at the world as a place full of doors. Shamhat now teaches the next lessons: bread and beer. The first is grain convinced to become cloud inside an oven. The second is water taught to sing. Enkidu eats, and his face brightens as if light had remembered him. He drinks, and laughter shakes him, not as an animal's cry, but as a human announcement of surplus. Clothes come next, not shame, but signal. Cloth says, I belong to a household. Cloth says, my skin is not my only identity. Shamhat leads him to a shepherd's camp. He keeps watch at night with a club, enjoys the flattery of being thanked. The skills of a city, delayed gratification, mutual aid, scheduled violence, enter his muscles. Then comes Uruk, the city that could not be ignored if you tried. Its walls are pride-made brick. Its streets hum with barley arithmetic and marriage law. Enkidu walks them as a stranger who has only just acquired shoes, and the city's noise teaches him another lesson: power that doesn't need to shout. When he hears how Gilgamesh treats his people, kingly appetites everywhere, thresholds ignored, something flares in the new citizen. The wild man who once freed animals now feels the justice owed to households, and his body remembers wrestling as a language. They collide like weather. Gilgamesh comes to a gate expecting it to yield. Enkidu bars it with a posture he didn't know he knew. Their fight is a festival of strength. The earth knows their names by pressure, walls by echo. Neither can finish the other. The city pauses, stunned by a duel that doubles as a mirror. In the stalemate, a hinge turns. The combat cools into recognition, and recognition becomes a vow so intense it startles the text into tenderness. Dreams had said it already in images. A meteor that cannot be moved. An axe someone loves as if it were a bride. Gilgamesh's mother interprets, "You will love him like a wife." The phrase lands with ambiguous heat. The point is not category but charge. They are now each other's measure. The friendship dignifies them both. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine, had been a tyrant by default, a storm with a crown. Enkidu, entirely mortal, had been a storm without a city. Together they become a channel. They will leave Uruk to carve a fame that can hold their heat. The cedar forest stands like a god's beard at the world's edge, guarded by Humbaba, whose face is an earthquake. They decide to go not because the city needs timber, though it always does, but because young strength seeks something heavier than a gate to test itself against. Preparations become ritual. They pray to Shamash, the sun god, for favor, and the priests lay hands on their weapons as if blessing plows. Gilgamesh has dreams of mountains pinning him. Enkidu reads the nightmares as promises. Fear is just awe waking early. When they reach the forest, the air smells like antiquity, resin, and time. Humbaba arrives with a roar like a hill collapsing into its own shadow. The battle is ugly and holy, not fencing, but excavation, digging a space where courage can breathe. They kill him together, then hack cedar. It is impossible not to hear the sound as both triumph and warning. The city learns again that when men reach far, gods do not always applaud. Ishtar sees Gilgamesh crowned in victory and makes a proposition as old as dawn. Be my lover. He refuses with a list of her exes, each turned to ruin or animal or wreck. It is brave to say no to a goddess. It is also foolish. She borrows the bull of heaven from her father and unleashes famine on legs. Furrows become graves. Men learn that hunger can gore. Gilgamesh and Enkidu do not hesitate. They corner the bull and kill it. Enkidu throws a haunch at Ishtar and boasts with the unprotected joy of someone who has never yet paid full price for a victory. The bill arrives in dream. The gods convene. The ledger is opened. Someone must pay for killing divine property. They will not kill the king. They will take the friend. The sentence is not a heroic blow, but a sickness, a wasting that introduces time into a man who had never met it properly. Enkidu rages, at the door that admitted him to the city, at the trap that first entangled him, at the hunter, at the priestess even, before his anger softens into blessing because the text will not leave Shamhat stained. He dreams of the underworld and wakes shivering at what it demands, dust as food, silence as music, names unraveling. Gilgamesh sits beside him and roars like a bereaved animal learning grammar. When Enkidu dies, the epic does not avert its eyes. 7 days and 7 nights the king refuses burial, holding the body as if stubbornness could delay rot. It cannot. A maggot falls from the nostril, the least poetic detail in literature and therefore the truest. Grief becomes a teacher with iron patience. The king tears his robe into a map of loss and walks off the map entirely. What does a man who could defeat giants do against death? He becomes a pilgrim. He hunts the one human who outlived mortality. Utnapishti, flood survivor, the man who got his name written in the margin of the god's book. The road is a syllabus of thresholds. Scorpion men guard a tunnel where the sun sleeps. Gilgamesh begs passage and earns it by showing he will not turn back even when the dark has texture. He crosses the sea of death with ferryman Urshanabi after smashing the very things he needed, then rebuilding skill in a panic of humility. He arrives ragged at immortality's house and asks, "How do I not die?" Utnapishti answers with a story older than the city. A god warned him. He built a boat broader than a country. He loaded seeds and animals. The flood came, the raven did not return. The boat grounded on a mountain. He walked out into a sky that was a newborn again. The reward for surviving was a life that did not end. But he will not give the secret cheaply. He tests the king with an impossible exam. Do not sleep for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh fails in moments. A god who refuses to rest cannot imagine how human he is until sleep drags him under like a kind thief. There is a leaf at the bottom of the sea. Utanapishti relents, a plant with spines like a hedgehog and a taste like second chances. Gilgamesh dives and wins it, weeping with the relief of a child who has found his mother's hand in a crowd. He will take it to Uruk and share it with elders and youth, a democratic miracle. But at a pool on the way home, he bathes. A snake smells destiny and steals it, shedding skin as if to say, immortality belongs to those who molt, not to those who build. The king screams into the sky with the helpless honesty of someone who has learned the curriculum too late. What remains when a miracle is stolen? Architecture. He returns to Uruk and points at the walls, stone that does not forget the hands that placed it. He reads the city to himself as if it were scripture, foundations sunk deep, ramparts bright as intelligence, gates that regulate movement without malice. The lesson's edge is double. You cannot live forever. You can make something that concentrates life so well it outlasts you by speaking your name to strangers. Where is Shamhat now? Everywhere the epic is honest about cause and arrival. Without her, there is no citizen to fight a king, no friend to teach a king love, no grief to teach a king limits, no pilgrimage to teach a king the beautiful poverty of being human. She is not erased by the noise of giants and gods. She is the quiet that started the music. When the text says sex civilizes, it is not making a joke. It is drawing a circuit diagram. Appetite, intimacy, instruction, community, law, grief, wisdom. The first link matters because the last link cannot exist without it. Stand at the wall with Gilgamesh and feel the wind pull at your hair. Hear the market like surf. Think of a coin ringing on linen. Think of a law throwing lovers to a river. Think of a priest binding a knot against a night visitor. Think of a woman at a waterhole pressing chaos into shape with her hands and her patience. Civilization is not the absence of wildness. It is wildness taught to carry water. The king has learned respect for that teaching the hard way. He will still be fierce. He will also be careful. One more turn of the hinge. If intimacy can make a man human, what can loss make of him? A builder, a judge, a mourner who propagates meaning like seeds. The epic refuses to give us immortality. It offers us craft. The walls endure because the grief that built them knew what they were for. Not to keep death out, but to keep life organized enough to matter before death arrives. That is a harder, humbler eternity. And so the poem hands you back to the city, not disenchanted, but recalibrated. The goddess is still dangerous. The law still cold. The poem still hot. The clinic still busy. The night still has teeth. But a human can learn. The proof is a man who once would have kicked a gate aside now counting bricks with a lover's care. We have one part left. The borders you cannot cross without breaking the machine, and the narrow lane where, even then, meaning finds a way to walk.